in about 1885, Arthur started winning sprint events, not only at Darlington, Cleveland College, but at Feetham's, where there were regional events, like athletic events held under the Northern Counties Athletic Association. And then further afield. So he was beginning to get a name for himself as a decent sprinter on the Northern Athletic Circuit. And in 1886, he was doing well enough for his trainer to enter him for the 3As in London, which were not only the national championships, they were really the world championships. American runners would come over and compete in the 3As that year in 1886 they were in London at Stamford Bridge, but they were in different places. Like in 1887 they were in Stourbridge. But so Arthur by 1886 was seen as a runner, a sprinter of nationals, of kind of having times that were good enough to compete nationally against the best. And so as I've said, in 1886 him and his trainer travelled down to London, and Arthur competed in the 100-yard sprint and in other races like the 200 yards. But he won the 100 yards, and he set a new record for the 3A's championship. He set a time of 10 seconds even, 10 seconds dead. Now 10 seconds had been run before, it had been recorded before, but never at a national championships. And the difference was the national championships, there were 3 timekeepers, so that you know, and then you could kind of compare the times to each, because it was all done by handheld watches and stopwatches. Whereas at other athletic events, you couldn't ratify the times, because usually there'd be 1 timekeeper, or at the most 2 timekeepers. So in that sense, Arthur got lucky in setting the record at the national championships. One of the interesting features of that day was that it was the first time that northern runners had the cheek to come south and win events. You know, and the Amateur Athletics Association was a socially elite group of ex-public school boys, southern-based, London-based, and usually it was other public school boys that competed and won events. Now, in the 1880s, you had the development of spectator sport, for many reasons, such as shorter working hours, what we would see as massively long working hours that were slightly less long, the growth of the railways. People had a little bit more time, a few pennies extra to spend on leisure, and the means to get to places to watch leisure. So sporting events were becoming an industry in themselves, really. So obviously in the north, you got far more professional events, and really Sheffield in the 1880s was the sporting capital of Britain. Really, it had so many events and sporting occasions going on in the area. So it wasn't unusual that a lot of runners from the north were actually winning events at the 3As. But a book by Montagu Shearman, who is a member of the 3As committee, in his memoirs that he wrote sometime after the 1886 championships, he kind of, he makes the point that for the first time northern runners had come down, and he saw them as working class runners. I mean, Arthur wasn't working class, but he saw them as working class runners because they were from the north, winning events, and he said it's the first time he had the emergence of the northern runner, really, the northern athlete.
What was the public reaction to Arthur not only winning the race but setting the record?
Well, it's interesting because the reaction to Arthur locally, it was one of warmth, love, affection. He was now a national celebrity that lived locally. Darlington's favourite son. There was a song composed about him. Unfortunately, we don't have the words, but apparently there was a song composed. And, newspaper articles saying actually the name Wharton is a northeastern name, so his family must have come from the north. There was this kind of colonisation of Arthur locally. However, nationally, with the London press, which had more of a political agenda, it caused Arthur's triumph caused some problems for them, because at the same time as Arthur, the African man of colour, was winning at events in London, you had the colonisation of Africa and the kind of the Treaty of Berlin, which was carving up Africa for the European powers, especially Britain, France, Belgium, on the basis that Africa needed to be civilised. We know it was a carve up for the raw materials, but then it was justified as the Africans are uncivilised. They need Christianity. They need schooling. They need education. They need clean water. So that's how the colonial kind of agenda played out ideologically. So, but Arthur didn't fit with that because he was an African and he was actually beating white people at their own game, because the justification for the biological or evolutionary justification for the colonisation of Africa was a kind of pseudo-Darwinism that Africans were the least evolved of the human race and the whites were the most evolved, and Anglo-Saxons were at the top of the tree. So it would be good if the more evolved peoples civilised the less evolved peoples. Well, Arthur, being educated, being clever, being articulate, and being good at what he did, kind of overturned all those views because he was African. Okay, he was of mixed heritage, but he was also African. He didn't fit that kind of ideological stereotype that was created of the African.
Cool. What is you talked a little bit about his. I think you've said before that he's had an amazing sense of his own worth. Can you give us a couple of examples where that was illustrated? I'm thinking specifically about the throwing contest and the smashing of the trophy.
Yeah, the Arthur. If we compared Arthur to sports people of the 20th and 21st century, he's a kind of mixture of Muhammad Ali, Pele, Balotelli in a way, to bring it right up to date. Balotelli's kind of, in many ways, a real contradiction. He's got a wonderful side to him, an eccentric, compassionate side where he pays people's library fines off, goes into schools to use their toilet, spends a day talking to the children, and then he'll stamp on somebody's head, and so he's this wonderfully contradictory character. Muhammad Ali was a man that was very proud of who he was, that was willing to put his head above the parapet, knew his own worth. Pele was just an excellent sportsman, was probably the best footballer he's ever been. Now Arthur had a combination of all of that. Arthur reached the very top in athletics, the very top in football. He knew his own worth. He was proud, he was articulate, and there was one athletics event where he won the cricket ball competition, and he threw the ball the furthest, and he also beat his next best throw, beat the second best person. And so he claimed both prizes, because he had the furthest throw and the second best throw, and he wanted both prizes. So that gives you an idea. And also in one race, he felt he'd won, and most people at the event felt he'd won. But because he was on, the person who actually was given first place was a local runner, and it was a local timekeeper. Arthur objected, and so when he was given his second prize of a salad bowl, he threw it to the ground in front of the organisers' feet and said, I want first prize, and you can make a new one out of the bits for my first prize, you know. So there's another incident where he was lying down before a race. I mean, it said in the newspaper report, he said he was lying down, they had tents for athletes to change in then, so like marquees. And he was lying behind a rolled up carpet. I mean, I don't know where he was, where this rolled up carpet was. But so he's having a bit of a rest, kind of 40 winks before the race, behind a rolled up carpet, which meant he wasn't seen by a couple of other competitors who were talking about not wanting to run against the nigger, as it was said in the report. And so Arthur jumped up at this point and offered to box him instead, you know. So I think that was the fastest race they'd run in their lives. It was out of the tent, you know. But yeah, so Arthur was a proud man and willing to kind of stand up for what he felt was due to him, or what he felt his worth was, you know. And that carried on in his football as well.